In this comparative study, I will explore the research question of how do Dr. Strangelove and In the Loop utilize filmic techniques to critique bureaucratic incompetence within their respective political and historical contexts. These films were chosen for comparison as both films are political satires exploring systemic flaws and failures in leadership to satirize the incompetence of bureaucracy. I will also consider their historical and political contexts as an American and a British film based on the Cold War and the Iraq War respectively, released 4 decades apart. I will further examine their use of the film techniques, narrative structure, mise-en-scène, cinematography, performance, and lighting to ridicule and expose the incompetence of politics. By juxtaposing these films, we can see how satire evolves to reflect contemporary political anxieties while retaining its core function, to ridicule those in power. Dr. Strangelove was released in 1964. The Cuban Missile Crisis had occurred just 2 years prior, bringing the United States and the Soviet Union to the brink of a nuclear war. Kubrick, like many others, was subject to Cold War dread and nuclear paranoia.
Well, I was interested in whether or not I was going to get blown up by an H-bomb.
Through Dr. Strangelove, Kubrick criticizes the paradoxical nature of mutually assured destruction and satirizes the government's reliance on the military-industrial complex, echoing Eisenhower's sentiment from 1961 that Americans must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. On the other hand, In the Loop reflects the dysfunctional British-American politics and media-driven events in the lead-up to the 2003 Iraq War, satirizing how bureaucratic incompetence enables politicians to manipulate information to push for war. The leak of Liza Weld's heavily doctored paper Pip parallels the release of a dossier on Iraq's weapons program, criticizing the use of faulty and false information to justify the 2003 war on Iraq. Both films belong to the satirical comedy subgenre, using humor, irony, and wit to critique human and societal flaws and to amplify social absurdities. Unlike other comedic genres such as slapstick that aim purely to entertain the viewers, satire has 2 purposes: to amuse and to provoke reflection, often challenging audiences to question norms, power structures, or hypocrisy in society. It is often a reflection of a grim reality when a situation becomes so dark that the only solution is to ridicule and laugh at its absurdity. Dr. Strangelove and In the Loop employ different styles of satire to critique their political climates. Dr. Strangelove's satire stemmed from existential dread, while In the Loop satire has evolved to cynical pragmatism. Both Kubrick and Iannucci used narrative structure, mise-en-scène, and cinematography to criticize systemic flaws. Kubrick's circular narrative structure reflects Cold War fatalism, a belief that mutual assured destruction was an inescapable outcome of bureaucratic rigidity. The film opens with a B-52 refueling sequence and ends with a series of nuclear explosions as the world reaches doomsday, creating an ideal bookend of images mirroring the opening tranquility. Dr. Strangelove cuts meticulously between 3 distinct storylines: Jack D. Ripper's lockdown at the Burpleson Air Force Base, the frantic politicians in the war room, and the pilots in the B-52 airplane. Each setting represents systemic incompetence at different levels of bureaucracy: military execution, political decision-making, and procedural obedience. The narrative is tight, with every shot significant either because of key plot points, great acting, or classic shots and lines.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
The inescapability of the circular and airtight narrative reflects how the characters are unable to escape from a rigid system that directly caused nuclear annihilation. In contrast, while In the Loop cuts between various storylines much like Dr. Strangelove, it uses an episodic, fragmented structure instead of Kubrick's carefully controlled structure to mimic how disorganized decision-making, such as the Iraq War's justification, allowed incompetence to proliferate. Irrelevant subplots such as Simon Foster's constituency office wall, Karen Scott's tooth, and Toby cheating on Susie all collide haphazardly with the dominant narrative, satirizing how trivial distractions are often prioritized over policymaking. Both structures critique bureaucracy's failure to adapt. Kubrick's fatalistic circularity condemns rigid systems as doomed to fail, while Iannucci's fragmentation shows how lack of structure enables incompetence to persist. The mise-en-scène reveals a lot about each film's view of bureaucracy. Kubrick employs what's known as a formalist approach, meaning every element we see on screen, from the symmetrical composition of shots to the stark lighting contrasts, is carefully controlled to create meaning. This meticulous control mirrors the very bureaucratic systems the film criticizes, with politicians becoming overly reliant on the illusion of control brought on by mutual deterrence during the Cold War era. An example of this is the war room, which provides the physical as well as the psychological framework for the film's investigations, acting as a space within which the manifestation of paranoia took place. The film's monochromatic palette consisting of whites, grays, and blacks mirrors the binary of Cold War ideology between capitalism and communism, mocking how these juxtaposing ideas led to war. Conversely, In the Loop's mise-en-scène emphasizes claustrophobic chaos. Government offices are littered with messy paper piles and general office clutter, in an effort to make the setting appear as ordinary as possible. The Future Planning Committee's war Deliberations unfold around a cluttered ping-pong table, with officials crammed into a chaotic makeshift space. This absurd setting, where life and death strategies are debated amid sports equipment and disarray, satirizes bureaucracies that treat warfare as a frivolous game. While Kubrick's characters are trapped in a pristine stage set, Iannucci's is drowned in clutter, reflecting the chaos and disorganization of contemporary politics. These differing approaches are further highlighted by the cinematography used in each film. Dr. Strangelove was shot almost entirely on a 14.5 or 28mm lens, allowing for excessive use of static wide shots to create a detached, almost clinical perspective, especially in the war room. Kubrick and his cinematographer Gilbert Taylor used deep focus, keeping everything in frame sharp from foreground to background, to force the viewer to pay attention to every detail, evoking Cold War surveillance culture, where every detail was micromanaged to maintain an illusion of control. The whole film unfolds in a noir-like black and white, imparting a quality suggestive of documentary treatment which goes with the visual style of matter-of-fact sublimity. Kubrick's approach to cinematography heavily juxtaposes with Iannucci's more improvisational and naturalistic approach, as seen in his directions towards the cast.
Go where you like, we'll find you. Don't look for the camera, we'll come after you.
As such, cinematography Jamie Cairney makes generous use of handheld cameras and tight close-ups, reminiscent of mockumentaries and its British sitcom predecessor, The Thick of It, to amplify visceral chaos and enhance the naturalistic tone of the film. During Malcolm Tucker's profanity-filled rants, the camera shakes and zooms erratically, mimicking the character's loss of control and satirizing the normalization of incompetence within political systems. Unlike Dr. Strangelove, wide shots are rare, reflecting the tunnel vision of bureaucrats unable to see beyond their own ambitions and goals. Kubrick's formalism cinematography critiques systems that are over-reliant on rigid ideological systems, while Iannucci's sitcom style mirrors the instability of institutions, where spin substitutes for substance. If systems are flawed, then the leaders who operate them are catastrophically incompetent. Dr. Strangelove and In the Loop present leadership not as a safeguard against, but as an unintentional catalyst of disaster. In Dr. Strangelove, performances are caricatured and deliberately exaggerated to satirize the absurdity of leaders. George C. Scott's General Turgidson delivers lines like,
You ought to see it sometime. It's a sight. A big plane like a 52 room. It's jet exhaust frying chickens in the barnyard.
with a grotesque grin and over-exaggerated body language, reflecting how political ideology distorts rationality and mocking the idea that any system, no matter how logical, is vulnerable to human insanity. Peter Sellers' triple role as Muffley, Mandrake, and Strangelove embodies the three types of flaws in leadership: weakness, naivete, and amorality. Muffley has a series of painfully labored hotline conversations with the Soviet premier.
He went and did a silly thing.
His ineptitude as a world leader shining through every word as he reduces the danger and severity of nuclear annihilation to the level of a very serious social gaffe, inviting the audience to laugh at the absurdity of his nonchalance. In contrast, In the Loop's dialogue thrives on naturalistic improvisation.
As we say, we have a script, but I do encourage the actors to improvise around the script.
Malcolm Tucker, a caricature of Iraq spin doctors such as Alistair Campbell, delivers insults with rehearsed spontaneity, mimicking the rapid-fire spin of real-life politics.
Was it you, the baby from Eraserhead?
No.
Then it must have been you, the woman from the crying game.
It wasn't me.
Simon Foster stammers through press conferences, his incompetence laid bare by every and ah interlaced in his lines. Kubrick uses caricature to condemn leaders as either pedantic or foolishly unhinged, while Iannucci's realism reveals how mediocrity thrives in systems that value spin over action. Lighting is used to draw attention to the characters to satirize how leaders are often inept. Kubrick uses high-contrast lighting to present the absurdity of characters. For example, in General Ripper's office, shadows carve deep lines into his face, his eyes glinting with madness under a single overhead light. Here, Kubrick uses a low-key lighting, creating a certain chiaroscuro effect that gives off on his dubious credibility, externalizing his paranoia to mock the military-industrial complex and the idea that one general can end the world. In the Loop does the exact opposite, opting for harsh, flat lighting that strips away glamour. Government offices are covered in sickly fluorescence, making characters look pale and exhausted. When Malcolm Tucker forces Michael Rogers to manipulate the intelligence report, the unflattering light exposes his moral grayness. There are no shadows left to hide in. Lighting in both films exposes leadership's moral decay. Kubrick's chiaroscuro lighting visualizes the darkness of fanaticism and the leader's detachment from reality, while Iannucci's flatness exposes the ordinary and unremarkable banality of leaders. Through filmic techniques such as narrative structure, mise-en-scène, cinematography, performance, and lighting, Kubrick and Iannucci reveal satire's power to both terrify and amuse. Dr. Strangelove's existential satire warns of blind faith in institutions. In the Loop's cynical satire indicts the incompetence of those within them. Together, they remind us that in politics, the line between tragedy and farce is perilously thin, and that laughter, however uneasy, may be the sanest response.